The models of teaching, simulations and role-playing. This is getting outside the usual conventional box of delivering information in direct instruction or lecture format, but exciting possibilities here for work in the classroom and outside. So principles, looking at transfer of learning beyond the classroom. Classically, I think of simulators for training pilots, that you can only do so much from a textbook in the classroom. At some point, you need something in the transition to actually flying a plane, and most all training uses some kind of simulators where you can program in weather conditions changes and actually practice at performing it correctly. 2, it's one effective way to add some measure of reality to a curriculum. In working with students on communication, for example, assertiveness training really lays out a continuum from understanding the principles to imagining a better way of reacting to practicing in the classroom a more assertive approach as a lead-in to actually making a difference in one's behavior. Especially important and effective when people are handicapped by being introverted and afraid to speak honestly and openly. So there are many applications of simulations and role-playing. It can be time-consuming to train. Anytime you move from book learning and test-taking into practice and transfer into the world, it does take time, but it's a way to go in depth, in greater depth, and assure learning. It's challenging to assess. It's not just paper and pencil, but observations, feedback from client populations in the field. Students typically appreciate the variety. Only so much energy can be expended for sitting and listening and taking notes, and the variety tends to re-engage students. Students learn to appreciate active, interactive learning, and they do appreciate that. It's a change, and they can see the benefits of practicing what they're studying. And one way to raise awareness, role-playing, can push students, for instance, in case study work, to take on a variety of different perspectives. In that way, to broaden their understanding of an issue and how to think about it. 2, summary of key terms. It can be planned, but it can also be spontaneous. What, as an instructor, we can do in class. It's very active and interactive and adds great variety and change of pace to normally sitting and listening and taking notes. Debriefing becomes important, to step back at the end of an activity and reflect on what worked, what didn't work, how different people approached it. Varied assessments, as mentioned. There's paper and pencil, but there's observation, professional judgment, journaling, self-reflection by students. A new pedagogy for simulating resource scarcity, for example, in this era of attention to climate change and decline of fossil fuels, for example. How do we have to rethink education? So this comes from the Chronicle of Higher Education, McBride and Lynn, and they argue that innovation alone won't fix social problems. Quote, imagine pedagogy where students learn how to organize movements, advocate, and lobby, as well as model decision-making for groups under conditions of resource scarcity. So instead of just practicing with information about current situations, here students could role play different perspectives on energy issues, for example, and to surface a range of viewpoints before thinking through what possible solutions are, from people who work in oil and gas, for example, to environmentalists, to elected officials, to local property owners. McBride and Lynn go on, quote, imagine programs that involve students in helping communities research existing effective practices and plan to adopt them. So simulations and role-playing could be used to move learning from the classroom out into the field in an applied setting. In his article, Isolated Scholars, Andrew Hoffman critiques traditional academic preoccupations with specialized journals that rarely impact society. This is a problem that cuts across all disciplines, and it's a challenge to academics to go beyond their own narrow subspecializations to also write for and communicate with the general public. So according to Hoffman, many academics are actually resistant to extending their work into the public applied arena, partly because those outlets, those journals, those magazines, those books aren't seen as valuable, as important as what we refer to as peer-reviewed journal articles. According to Hoffman, public discourse on critical scientific issues of our day has become so confused partly because academics are writing for other academics, their refereed group, and not enough for the public. According to Hoffman, success will be measured not in citation counts, one academic to another, but by changes in the way people think about the problems we face and their solutions. The argument is that we need more people writing for the general public to influence their thinking. 3. Another author, Russell Jacoby, a professor of history at UCLA, warns in his 1987 book, The Last Intellectuals, that the increasing insularity of individual academic fields registers not the needs of truth, but academic empire building. So the critique is here that faculty in their subdisciplinary expertise tend to be too far removed from the open, honest, informed discussions that a vibrant democracy requires. Academics find themselves talking to ever smaller and narrower academic audiences using a language that educated readers do not understand, publishing in journals that they don't read, and asking questions they don't care about. Whether this work actually creates real-world change is a question that is rarely, if ever, asked. Again, the argument for simulations and role play is to challenge students to take their learning out into the field and apply that learning to real problems. Questions to ponder. How can you use simulations and role playing in your own subject area? What is the value of creative, active, and interactive efforts to explore questions and topics for student learning?